Okay, I think we're live and we're back for another episode today. Joined by Professor Jeremy May here at the University of Houston. Honestly, though, the first thing I actually wanted to ask you about is your profile picture in your email is the X-Wing. And also in your website, your kind of design is based off the Star Wars logo. So I'm kind of curious to know how much of a big Star Wars fan you are and kind of like your why you chose those things, I guess.
Well, let's just say that the first movie came out when I was like 2 years old, and I saw it in the theater, though I don't remember that. I do remember Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi in the theater, so I grew up with it. It's been around, but given what they've done in recent years, it resonates with the students as well. So all of that comes back. The logo is during the pandemic. I made small toy kits for my kids and neighbor kids, and so I made it so they could build their own TIE fighter and their own X-Wing. So I just threw that up there. It's given that we had moved everything online, it was just what I was doing at the time too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you kind of saw in the group, there are a lot of Star Wars fans in the group, so we've kind of just built an identity around that, not to appropriate any brands or anything like that, or tread on any copyrights or trademarks.
Yeah. No, I was just curious because, I actually, I was curious because I recently watched like Mandalorian season 3, and I started thinking about that. So I don't know how like caught up you are in like, I don't know, I guess recent Star Wars media, I guess you'd say. Like, I mean, have you only watched the movies or like how?
We've seen, I'd say most of it. The only mini franchise or sub franchise that we have not seen is the Andor series yet, but most everything else we've seen. And back in high school, I read most of the expanded universe books, so I have some of that background. I don't know how much I still remember, but at one point it was in the head.
Yeah, I loved the Mandalorian, so I have a couple T-shirts actually. But good. Mandalorian's definitely been one of my favorite. It's nice to have like something that's not like Sith versus Jedi. I kind of like those offshoot things. So anyway, I really like the Mandalorian. I really want to see. I think it'd be really interesting to have like a Origin of the Sith type of movie, almost like a horror movie. I don't know how they do it, but I would love to see that. I would love to see that. I don't know if there's any sort of media you'd like to see make it to the big screen as far as like Star Wars goes. It's something like you really would love to see.
I don't know. Just as a recommendation to you, have you gone through some of the old Knights of the Old Republic games? They get some of that background too. And at the very least, I think there's some novelizations of them that you could look at. They may do a movie of that. I don't have any particular area that would be of special interest to me.
Yeah, sure. So, it is exciting though, because it's on Disney Plus. So there's a lot of media that's coming out though. And I actually trust, Dave Filoni, and I also trust, Favreau to like create that universe. I trust them. Favreau. So,
well, I liked Brian, what's his name, that did the second sequel movie, the Last Jedi.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that director, but
yeah, I forget his last name, but I liked where he took it. He questioned a lot of the assumptions, but then Abrams just he erased it. He made it very Disney friendly, not so much, movie innovation. But anyway,
the last three. I think they were good. I think they were fun movies, but I don't know if they're necessarily good Star Wars movies. I think that's kind of like the way I like to put it.
That's what people think about the prequels, though. But your generation grew up with them as canon, so
yeah. I think the actors also did a really good job too. Like it was really just a story that didn't really feel good. At least I know that the actors like tried their absolute best. It just the story kind of just especially with episode. I'm going to spoil this here. I don't really care. It's been years. So like with episode 9, the return of like Darth Sidious, like why?
Oh, the
I don't know.
last one was horribly done. The story was atrocious. Agreed.
Yeah. But I'm optimistic now. I think I also really liked I forget the actor's name now. Who played Ben Skywalker. I forget his name, but I really liked him. I really liked the woman who played Rey Skywalker too. So there were a lot of good aspects of it. But anyway, what it is
all
now.
of them. John Boyega was good, and
Yep.
Isaac Oscarson.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Oh yeah, he was really good. Although I have heard good things about this Andor, so maybe I have to check that out.
Yeah.
Anyway, but Star Wars media I think is in good hands moving forward, though. So we'll see. We'll see. Actually, one of the first times I had met you was actually through Zoom virtually, and I remember which first of all, thank you for I don't know, you were definitely one of the first professors to kind of impress me to come here to Houston. So
hey, I wanted to recruit you. I wanted to recruit you.
I always appreciated that opportunity. And for those prospective students that are looking, definitely hit up Professor May. He will definitely give you the best of the best that here at Houston has to offer. But in that Zoom meeting, you were in Alaska, and I remember you saying that I think you had family out there, right? So I know you grew up in the northwest region of the United States. Was it in Alaska? Because I know you went to Utah, so I don't know where you kind of spent most of your time. But
I grew up in Montana.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, backwoods Montana, or near Billings, or
no, kind of out on
Bozeman.
The Plains, Great Falls, which at the time was the second largest city, but it hasn't grown and it's been overtaken by Bozeman. So yeah, city of 30, 40,000, something like that. Billings was the big
not
city,
too bad.
300,000. Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. So, what was that kind of experience like? So, I grew up in the suburbs, kind of near the big cities, but I'm not really I never really, grew up I never really, first of all, never been out to the Northwest, out in that region, Montana, Utah, Alaska. I know it's very beautiful. One day, I'm really into hunting, even though I've never hunted before, but I do like the hunting lifestyle and cattle lifestyle. I do appreciate that. So, what was kind of like growing up? Because now you're here in Houston, so it's that's a huge change for sure, right? So,
yeah, well, it was, I started out in Montana. I was born in Bozeman. Grew up in Great Falls. Did a little bit of high school in Florida. Moved to Tallahassee. Then finished high school in Salt Lake. Went to the University of Utah. So it's like moving to larger cities each time. After Salt Lake, went to Pasadena, which is in LA County. So and then to New York City. So just bigger city. And you can't go bigger than New York and stay in the States. So came to Houston. Houston's fourth largest, probably going to be third largest pretty soon. It was not a particular desire for big cities. I learned to like the city, especially in New York. But I also love the country. I grew up hunting in Montana as well. It's a great place to go. Most of Montana is state or county land that's leased. And so it's fairly open access. You just, given that it's ranch country, you just have to make sure that if a gate's open, you leave it open. If a gate's closed, you leave it closed, right? Because you want to stay friendly with the ranchers up there. They're good people, and you don't want to mess up what they're doing. So yeah, Texas is all right. I actually think there's too many people, but that's because I grew up in a state with less than 500,000.
Yeah.
And, not that much smaller than Texas. So,
yeah. So, now you also have family though in Alaska though, right? Is that if I
parents
understand
are in
that?
Alaska. Yeah. My wife's parents are on the west coast of Canada on Vancouver Island.
Okay.
So yeah, lots of ties to the Northwest, but pretty much to visit any family now, we have to fly. So that's too bad. But, when I went out for jobs, It was the start of the recession in 2007. So thankfully, the economy in Texas was strong and has been strong. So they were still hiring here in Houston, and really a growing department. So for the organic faculty that Professor Tsai was here, Professor Douglas was here, and Professor Thummel was here, Professor Lee was here. We've had some retirements, Tom Albright, but they were hiring a lot of new people and trying to grow. So, a lot of the people that as part of the department had not actually been hired yet. Professor Minich and I were hired the same year. So it was very different, but you could see that they were really putting that effort in. And it was a very collegial department. I've seen a lot of departments. I interviewed it. I had something like 15 or 16 different interviews. And you get a lot of different vibes at different departments. At one department I won't name, there was an active civil war between factions within the faculty because one faction wanted to hire in a different area of chemistry. The other faction wanted to hire in my area. And there was like open hostilities. A lot of the faculty refused to even meet with me. And you just don't want to go into an environment like that. It does not set you up for success. Whereas here, I met with people from all the different divisions within the department, and everybody spoke well of each other, worked together. When there was a problem with the room reservation, faculty went out to find another room and we moved it, and that's the kind of support I wanted starting out in an academic career.
Yeah. It's really been, I have nothing to say but good things about this department, honestly, since my time here. So it definitely been shaped over the last, 15 years or so. It's definitely been working towards a really up and coming department in chemistry here. So, and we definitely can talk more about that in a little bit too, because I know you're now the associate dean of the NSM, so the Natural Science and Mathematics, I think. So, I know you, you're up in that area now too. But kind of want to take it back a little bit. So, like, your kind of initial interest in chemistry, because as someone, I know you said you kind of finished high school in Florida, but generally speaking, kind of grew up, Great Falls. I maybe I'm making presumptions here, but I assume the STEM fields weren't exactly like pushed on you. Perhaps maybe like living in Montana. I don't know. I could be wrong there. So I kind of just want to hear your thoughts
wrong there.
Fair enough. I'll take it.
So growing up, they had various accelerator programs, and one of the things I participated in early on in elementary school was basically workshops. It was a weekly workshop in logic skills and reasoning, and then burden of proof, which of course is a huge element of STEM and the scientific method. And then, I ended up participating in things like Odyssey of the Mind was very strong, which is sort of an engineering endeavor program. And then there's a huge emphasis on math Olympiads and that. So I participated in a lot of math Olympiads. Now, the science I didn't see as much until I got to high school, in junior high, and they didn't have middle school there. It was just junior high. We still did the dissections and all the other things. But like most people, I didn't even see chemistry until high school.
So how did you, so then you went you moved back, I guess, to then Salt Lake City then. So after high school.
Yeah.
And you went to University of Utah. Okay. So, well, I guess in general, like how was, University of Utah, and then I assume that's where you kind of began your chemistry journey, or, how'd that all transpire?
Yeah. So I was interested in computer programming and chemistry, and enjoyed both of them a lot. They both came fairly natural to me. Had scholarships in both, and ended up focusing on the chemistry more. The programming just got to be tedious. I got into a research lab with Peter Beal at the University of Utah, and I kind of like the chaos and unpredictability of running organic reactions. Computer science is very logical, very precise. The computer will do exactly what you tell it to do, for better or worse. And so in theory, you could sit down and design it all ahead of time. Now, it's complex enough now that that's not the case. But at the time, I loved the chaos, and I loved working with my hands, doing experimental chemistry. So I ended up leaning a lot more on that side.
Yeah. And so, how was life at the University of Utah? Like I said, I've never really been up there. So what were
fantastic. Well,
yeah.
great programs in both computer science and chemistry. And that's one of the big things that drew me there. Very strong in chemistry, fantastic faculty, again, worked well together, but also cared about teaching and their students a lot. So I have a lot of fondness for the program there. Also, an extraordinary amount of hobbies. So I took up mountain biking, rock climbing, both trad and sport, canoeing, kayaking, snowshoeing, skiing, snowboarding, hiking.
I didn't even know all those were things.
Yeah, I just constantly, I played basketball 2 or 3 times a week, was in the Ultimate Frisbee League, just so much going on, on top of the research and the academics. So
I was going to say, how did you balance it all? Or is it, if you're doing something fun, you definitely
college, it's easy, right?
Yeah, that's true.
I did a lot of AP classes in high school, so I only had to take 3 elective classes, and everything else was, classes for my major. And I could have done it in 2.5 years, but I took it easy. I did it in 3 years, 3.5. And so I was able to put in filler classes, lots of electives, and that helped me focus and just do 2 or 3 heavy classes at a time, and that freed me up to do other things too. And I'm glad I did it that way.
Yeah. So how did you come to the decision then to do graduate school? Was that something you'd always been thinking about, or is it what was
It was research.
How did yeah.
It was, so I had a class with Pete Beal. He taught the third quarter of OChem. While I was there, the university switched from a quarter system to a semester system. And, I was going through OChem, and he just said, you seem to be pretty good at this. You should do research. And I'm like, oh, okay. I had no idea, right? It takes someone to point this out. So I went and I talked with Gary Keck and Pete Beal, and, ended up joining his lab. He did RNA chemistry, but I was synthesizing artificial RNA bases.
Okay.
And so that, ties a lot into the modern era with the mRNA vaccines and everything they're doing. So, I learned a lot of nucleotide chemistry and a lot of how the DNA and RNA work, both naturally and artificially. And it's a lot more than most people know about with the genetic code. RNA is active catalytically. For example, in the ribosome, it's the RNA that's doing the catalysis, not the protein.
Oh.
The protein just holds the RNA. It's just so much interesting stuff there. And it was there, a chemistry bachelor's, you can go and be a technician somewhere, but it was not the career I wanted. And I didn't really want to get a real job yet. And so, applied for grad school, definitely wanted to do more research. I was looking at a lot of bioorganic groups. So I looked at Scripps and Berkeley and Caltech. I did not want to be on the East Coast, more for geographical and family preferences.
Fair enough.
And so I ended up going to Caltech, but then fell in love with synthetic organic chemistry rather than bioorganic.
I was going to say, I was going to be the next question, just kind of talk about Caltech. I know you work for Professor Brian Stoltz there. I assume he's still there. I don't know why
he is. He's doing very well. So when I went and visited Caltech, they had just announced they were hiring Brian and that they were recruiting David McMillan down from Berkeley. Dave was a assistant professor, and I think he was just going through the tenure process. And so they were recruiting him. And Brian and Dave were both at that recruiting session, got to know both of them, and everybody wanted to go to work for Brian and Dave. So, a normal Caltech organic chemistry class is around 20 people. They had 35 come that year. So just a lot more than they usually had.
Yeah.
But one thing Brian mentioned had stuck with me, and that is he had planned to move to Caltech from Harvard at the beginning of the summer, and he wanted some students to come and help him start the lab, open the boxes, take out the equipment, and get some projects going. And that sounded great to me. Wasn't doing anything else over the summer. But, that was early April, I think that visit was.
Mm-hmm.
So it got to be May and then June, and I hadn't heard anything from him. So toward the end of June, I emailed him and asked him if, there's still an opportunity to work. And, without going too much into what was going on in his life at the time, said yes. And so the plan, it had moved back from mid-June to mid-July because of some things he had to finish up. So
Sure.
yeah, I went out and was one of his first 4 students that summer.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So you were like part of you were one of his first students ever at Caltech then.
Yep.
That's really cool.
It was Sarah Spessard, who went to work for 3M. I don't know if she's still there.
Okay.
Eric Ferreira, who started all the early palladium chemistry. And he was at Colorado State for a while, but he's since moved to the University of Georgia. And then Neil Garg, who's been at UCLA and is still just a superstar there. So those were the 4 of us. And then other people that joined, Eric Ashley, who's now in Merck Process, Uttam Tambar, who's amazing faculty up at UT Southwestern. There were 7 of us. Who else? Doug Behenna, who's now at Pfizer over on the West Coast. No, he just left Pfizer. I think he's at Johnson & Johnson now.
Okay.
And so those 3 also joined us in the fall.
So I guess something, I guess with new faculty, there's always something extremely exciting there, right? Because you are like the next, I would say generation, I guess is one part, but you didn't have any doubts though, because right, it's like, oh, is this person going to get, tenure, or is there any like doubts, or like not really, it wasn't really like that at all?
Well, being the first year, you don't really have that issue because the tenure clock is 6 to 7 years.
True. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The second and third round of students that join that are
taking
the risk, right?
Yeah.
Getting in on the first year wasn't so bad, but there is a risk. I went through 2 projects before getting something that worked. And so that was. My first year was trying everything to get something to work, and it didn't work. And that's part of science. It just happens, right? He doesn't want to do it. So it was nervous. One thing about being the first class is everybody knows that the students are just as much responsible for getting things to work as the assistant professor, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you join an established group with an established chemistry, the PI gets almost all the credit. You're just the hands doing it, even though that's not true. That's the outside perception. But everyone knows the first students are the one getting there, making it work in the first place. So you get a little bit more credit there. So it's kind of a higher risk, higher reward situation for sure.
Yeah. So what were you working on at Caltech? I know you were doing like some stuff with diazocompounds and like the solution phase, but was it those for applications in like total synthesis and natural product synthesis, or?
Yeah, it's a total synthesis group. And so it's trying to find ways to build specific atomic structures, molecular motifs very efficiently. So I started out doing rhodium-1 chemistry, trying to do hydroformylation reactions on formate esters. It just, at least with the catalyst at the time, would not go. Now I think the biggest problem is it decarboxylates. If you do get that formal formate CH bond insertion, it's just going to decarboxylate. But anyway, it was a good idea. Worked on that for a while, and then took over a project from another guy who had done a rotation, Alan Northrup, who ended up working with David McMillan. And this was the hydrazone-based chemistry and trying to get more carbene reactivity out of it with what we're doing. And we were trying a number of Stevens rearrangements and some other things. And what ended up happening was the 1,2 hydride shift was much preferred, but given the nature of carbenes, it was unusual in that it formed a cis-oriented alkene preferentially instead of a trans. And so we were able to use that to our advantage in a number of ways. And at the same time, I had a friend that I had known at the University of Utah who was working in a mass spec lab there at Caltech. And he was wanting to do chemistry in the vacuum of the mass spec. And so modifying proteins to eventually use it for protein sequencing in the mass spec and come up with automated protein sequencing. And so we got together and we would design molecules and I would make them and he would test them. So that was a really productive collaboration. And we published 4 papers together just from that. It took like 15% of my time, yet it was 60% of my papers.
Well, that sounds really interesting. I mean, using the vacuum of the mass spec to do chemistry, that sounds, I mean, on the surface, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Like, so what was it like? What were you guys doing? Like, I'm trying to, that's really cool.
We're looking at specific, the peptide side chain structural motifs and having specific recognition. So I was mainly working with crown ethers, which are horrible to work with because they dissolve in everything. You can't crystallize them. They're gummy solids. But modifying them actually with carbene motifs and other motifs so that, you know, in water and solution, the crown ether would bind to lysine side chains.
Okay.
Then with electrospray, you can transfer that complex into the mass spec, and then you have a buffer gas, a helium. And so you can, as these are spinning around in the mass spec and the quadrupole, you can slam it into the helium and that heats it up. It gives it the vibrational energy.
Okay.
That would be enough to fragment the diazo group to a carbene, and then the carbene would react with the peptide. And the goal, we were trying to get dipole formation that would then allow for internal strand breaking within the peptide, and then the fragments would break apart. But what ended up happening instead was bond insertions. It formed new covalent bonds. And so after that, Ryan Julian is his name. He went on to follow that up with radical initiators in initiating radical strand cleavage in the proteins. And so he built a career out of that.
That's really cool. That's really cool stuff.
But yeah, we were the first to do carbene chemistry inside a mass spec, I think.
Yeah. So what was kind of, because, you know, obviously, you know, you mentioned a lot of things did not work, unsurprisingly, I guess. So like, you know, what were kind of the things that, you know, kind of kept you going? And like, you know, was there ever also too, like a moment where like you finally got a project that actually did work? And like, was there a moment that you kind of remember like, oh my God, this is going to work?
Yeah, that was the hydrazone chemistry.
Okay.
We were able to get the fragmentation, radical initiation, figure out the product. And once we saw that there was this cis vinyl ether, Stoltz immediately thought, well, those are an element in the Claisen reaction. What if we can do all of this at the same time? You know, do the carbene reaction, and then everything's there. We could just do the next reaction. And we ended up being able to draw out a whole bunch of fun sort of cascades based on sigmatropic rearrangements and olefin-oriented cascade reactions. So that was a fun. It's like having a new toy. Published that, and Dave Evans even used it as a CUME exam for the grad students there at Harvard. So that was but then I wanted to learn a lot of different chemistry, and there's no better way to do that than synthesis and total synthesis. So we moved to another fun molecule, and I spent my last 2.5 years doing total synthesis and basically proving that the strategy that we had developed could not work for the natural product. We were able to
Okay.
work in a model system, but in the natural product to make a quaternary carbon, it just did not work. So I proved that it reacted elsewhere on the molecule preferentially.
Yeah.
And so there was just no way it was going to work in the right position.
Okay. Interesting.
So sometimes science is proving something can't work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely a that's very inaccurate perspective. Also a unique one because no one ever really thinks about that, where it's like proving something does not work. It's just as insightful as proving something does work, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Doesn't get you.
It's not as glamorous, but
doesn't get you
I guess
a high-profile publication.
Yeah, or the grants or anything like that, but the funding. But
I ended up getting 2 more papers out of that project, though. One was published 12 years after I graduated. The other was 14 years after I graduated. So.
That's a slow burn right there. Slow burn.
Oh, yeah.
Put in the work.
You need a lot of patience as an experimental scientist. Well, in most experimental science, especially in synthesis, though, you know, the field is coming up on its 200th anniversary in 2027, I think, 27 or 29. The anniversary of the synthesis of urea from non-biotic precursors.
Okay.
Right? And so after 200 years, we know a lot. And so it takes a lot of work to move to something new and discover new things. And a lot of people think we can just make whatever molecules we want, but that's not the case. There are many challenges. And the other aspect of that is we can't make them well.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You know, you can make a lot of things in 40 steps, 40 reactions, but can you do it in 10? No.
Yeah. It's also like I've noticed that the yields are never particularly high either. So although one thing
overall, yeah. Cumulative, you know, starting with a kilo of your first building block, less than 1% of it actually makes it to the final product on those. So we're trying to improve that. Most of our published syntheses you're now above like 20-25% of that in terms of throughput.
Yeah. Something that I've really grown appreciative in my last 2 years in graduate school is like my first impressions of total synthesis were like, I'm gonna be honest, like just like, okay, why are we making these molecules like you guys are getting like like 2 nanograms or something, like, you know, not like some small amount for this natural product that may or probably may not even have biological activity. But when I over the last 2 years I've been here, I've noticed that it's not necessarily like the end product in most of the time. It's all about there's like maybe 1 or 2 key steps that have not been shown before. Now that would be useful in like other synthesis. That's kind of what I've kind of really grown appreciative of, like total synthesis, where it's like you're mainly looking for like that 1 key step or 2 key steps that is new, right? Yeah. So.
And once you put yourself in complex situations, you're going to discover new things. A lot of physical chemical principles have come about because of observations from doing total synthesis, and a lot of reaction innovation and finding, you know, new types of reactivity. Just because you're in this complex environment, so new unpredictable stuff is going to happen, and that's part of it. There's the discovery. And like I said, a lot of the field now is moving to be more practical and actually provide useful quantities of various molecules. Anyway.
Yeah. How is how do you frame the funding for natural products and total synthesis? Because, I mean, obviously, like you have the well-established, let's say, laboratories who get the funding because they are just well-established. But I feel like if you're an up-and-coming professor who wants to do total synthesis, how do you like say like, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to make this, you know, marine fungi. Like, how do you frame it? Because like, I don't know. I feel like from the chemistry point of view, it's like mostly just, I mean, obviously, like we're just interested in the chemistry itself, whether or not this have applications or not. But that's also not good for funding or grants, right? So it's like you have to kind of frame it in a way. So
yeah, a lot of you know, the groups my generation and newer will not have a purely synthesis-based program.
Okay.
So Sarpong, There are a couple recently hired Barron faculty who are almost entirely total synthesis. But you look at like Neil Garg or Sarah Reisman, those who are well known for doing synthesis also have a lot of catalyst development, reaction development, and other things. So the synthetic part is, I think, synergistically melded with those other efforts. And some of that is you look at complex molecules, and the old school way of doing it is, how do we build this using reactions that we have? And I would say more and more now, the synthetic chemists are looking at the structure and asking, how would we build it? How do we wish we could build this? Right? What would be the connections we would want to make? And a lot of the time, the reactions to do that don't exist. And so then that makes them think, well, how could I get this done? And they're developing new chemistry from that inspiration of the synthesis. And I think that is an incredibly powerful tool. And you can do that with the grant funding as well. Our strategy is usually development of new methodology in combination with the synthesis. And so we'll have a grant with 2 or 3 aims. And a part of it is mechanistic investigation, a part of it is methodology development, and a part of it is synthesis. And there's I don't say this critically, but I just don't think there's a stronger organic chemistry education than doing synthesis, where you have to learn 3 or 4 dozen reactions very well, instead of just focusing on one catalyst or one small motif. And when you go into a job, you're not going to be working on the same thing as your dissertation. And so having that broad understanding allows you to be adaptable to whatever the needs are in the industry. So I like that aspect of it a lot, and that is appreciated by pretty much all of the funding agencies too. But we have had grants funded that were entirely synthesis-based as well. But in that case, you need a motivation for why do you want to make these molecules, like you were saying. For example, we're working on a class of molecules that appear to have a privileged structural motif that in pretty much every case that's been tested has interesting biological activity. And that's rare. Like 6 out of 6 of the compounds that have been tested have biological activity, and it's not the same. Like, it's different for different structures. So we have a grant proposal that's just, let's make these, build a library, because this particular architecture is very special.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'd see where that goes. But after Caltech, you did a postdoc with Danishefsky. I'm blanking on where that was.
It was Memorial Sloan-Kettering in New York City. So we lived in Manhattan for 3 years.
Oh, Manhattan. Oh, man. That's okay. All right. First thing I got to ask is I know you're more of a West Coast type person, but how was it like living in Manhattan then? I mean, that must have been well, I guess you were kind of in LA. I guess you were in LA, but Yeah.
LA, I don't like the sprawling cities as much. It's dirty. You have to try to get around by car and all that. New York was fantastic. We loved walking everywhere, taking the subway. There's so much to see and do. The food was amazing. It was also incredibly expensive to live there. So we could not afford to live where we lived, but we were in the hospital housing, the student housing there. And so we had subsidized rent. We paid about a third to half of the market rate for what it was. And even still, it was tough to get instant. Yeah. The grocery stores around where we lived to buy food to make a meal you were paying as much as the cheap restaurants. And so we ate out a lot of the time. But, then they opened a Trader Joe's down around Union Station, down by NYU. And that was much more affordable. So every 2 weeks,
Yeah.
we'd go down and buy 16 to 20 bags of groceries, and they would deliver for $10. So we paid them the $10
Oh yeah.
them to deliver up, 5-6 miles to where we were. And then we would just stockpile for a while.
Yeah.
So it was great. We loved the museums. We loved so many other things that we did there.
Yeah. New York's always New York is a great city. I don't have any funds to live there. It's great to visit. I don't know if I'd live there. But I like the bustling of the city. But I have a bias towards Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York. But anyway, I wanted to ask you about first of all, why go do a postdoc? I guess most people do a postdoc because they want to become a professor one day, most of the time. So I guess by the time you're towards the end of your graduate degree, you're thinking about becoming a professor, or so how did that all kind of transpire?
I had committed. There was and there still is a lot that appealed to me in the pharmaceutical industry, and really developing treatments for disease to help other people. Really, the purpose of a postdoctoral fellowship is to study and gain skills that are different than what you did for your graduate work. And I knew that I had a somewhat limited synthetic experience and really wanted to expand upon it. I had interviewed with a few companies, but wasn't quite ready to take that plunge yet. And I really liked the idea of academics. There was that fear that you kind of mentioned earlier, that can I actually do this? Can I succeed? Can I get grant money? Can I have ideas that work? So there was that. But the postdoctoral fellowship would let me go either direction. It would still make me more desirable as an industry candidate. And if I wanted to go and do the academics, it would give me that preparation, because it is fairly needed for an academic job. You really need to demonstrate that it wasn't just your advisor's ideas, that you can come up with your own ideas, that you can do something different. A lot of postdocs will be mentors to the graduate students as well, so it shows that mentoring experience and the teaching. So all of that was part of it. But I did not decide to actually apply to academics until a year into my postdoc.
Fair enough. So what were you working on as a postdoc, and why? I mean, why go? I mean, obviously, why go work for Danishefsky? I kind of laugh at that, but what were you working on, and why go there?
Well, Sam, of course, is a master of synthesis. Just so many innovations, and developing new iterations of reactions. Danishefsky dyeing, other deals, alder chemistry, and I wanted to understand how he thought about synthetic problems, and that was a big part of it. And Sam, of course, at the time was working a lot on carbohydrate chemistry, and he really wanted me to do that. He thought it was, and he's right, the future of synthetic chemistry and the biological problems that need to be solved. But I had done carbohydrate chemistry as an undergrad with the nucleotide chemistry, and had no desire to do that. It's brutal chemistry where it's a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of failure for fairly low reward. And so I focused on natural products. I started out helping Tristan Lambert, who started at Columbia and is now at Cornell. I helped him finish his synthesis of an anti-cancer molecule, and then I was going to go in and make analogs and do the medicinal chemistry. And in fact, I made 25 analogs before we started testing the parent compound, and found it was just generally toxic to everything. It was just a universal. because the original chemists, they ran their reactions in cell-free assays where they ground up cells and, hey, look, this inhibits the enzyme.
Yeah.
But if you run it in whole cell assays, it just kills everything. So it was no good as it was a cancer stem cell therapy telomerase inhibitor. So, that was 7-8 months of my postdoc down the drain at that point, and never got published.
Rip.
And I think I got a patent out of it anyway. But then moved on to work on Maui crystal for another year, and I had to fight for that. Sam did not want me to work on that. He didn't like my route, so I was fighting Sam for a year to do it. It actually made pretty good progress, and I still like the route, but eventually Armin Zakarian and Phil Barron just have had beautiful syntheses of that molecule, so we're not going to go back to it at all. But then moved to another compound, which I've actually forgotten the name of, applicuridinone, I think is what it's called. And worked on that, got to the last 2 or 3 steps of the synthesis, and got my academic job, started here, and Sam finished the molecule by an entirely different route, so it never got published.
Man.
And then someone actually did publish a very similar route to what I was doing. So my route, my idea did work. It just didn't get finished during the postdoc.
Fair enough.
So that was my experience there, but I did learn a ton from Sam and how he thought about problems. So for the Maui crystal, for example, I went in and talked to him, and I'm like, here's how I want to do it. I want to do carbene chemistry. I know it'll make quat centers. It's really great. Sam says, oh, no, you got to do it by this Diels-Alder method, and he's drawing it out. And I'm standing there watching the master of the Diels-Alder make a fundamental mistake.
Oh, no.
In that he was getting a transfused Diels-Alder product. And I finally said, Sam, doesn't the Diels-Alder give a cis product? Oh, and he actually swore vehemently. I won't repeat it on your podcast.
I'll leave it up to imagination.
Yeah.
What he said.
And so he immediately started thinking, well, how do we get a trans product out of a Diels-Alder reaction? And he was thinking of that and he sketched a couple of things, but sure enough, 6 months after I started at UH, he publishes a Diels-Alder reaction that'll give you the transfused the transfused product.
Yeah.
Afterward, but it was through a tandem sequence, and so I was there like when he saw that problem. I was like, oh well, I'm not going to stand for not being able to do that. I'm going to come up with a way to do it, and he did, right? And that's where the only reason he worked out that approach to the Diels-Alder reaction was because of that synthesis.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, especially like seeing like an expert just be wrong, and then that in turns be to make an entire different.
Yeah. Well, how do I make myself right again?
Yeah, that's really cool. Especially you're there seeing it firsthand. Like that's really cool experience. Like, that's really cool. So now that you're here at Houston, I'm sure like maybe things have changed since you've kind of taken over your research group. But like, what are some of the projects that you got working on here at the May Lab?
Well, we started on a synthesis, didn't go anywhere. The first big hit was for a molecule that was published in 2008 when we were starting. And we wanted to, there were some errors in the publication. They were errors that were not known to be errors at the time. They were not really unavoidable, but just totally understandable. The scientists that made them were doing good science. So we wanted to perform this enantioselective synthesis. We were trying to mesh this with another organometallic project, which was propergillic substitution. And I still long and desire to get this chemistry to work, but it was one of my first proposals using ruthenium or rhodium, alanilidine intermediates and cumulene intermediates, which I still think there's a lot that could be exploited there. Anyway, so we were going to combine that method with the ß-indolyl alkaloid synthesis. And the alkaloid synthesis, what I thought would be a very trivial conjugate addition, just nothing existing worked. And, here's something that based on classes and what's been published, you would assume was a solved problem. But what a lot of people don't realize is that solved problems usually only work for a small subset of compound substitution. And when you get into things like indoles, perols, imidazoles, these nitrogen-rich heterocycles, 95% of catalysts just fail. And so you need to come up with new innovations. And so we turned to organocatalysis, work done by Mike Chong, originally disclosed in 2002, but improved. He published on it even in 2004, 2005. And when we did that, we got it to work for the indole compounds and published an orglet on that. That was our first publication. I was the only synthetic chemist at UH at the time. Scott Gilbertson was just moving here. Don Coulthart hadn't been here yet, no one else. And so it was a very materials-oriented department. I still remember being in my third year review and someone saying, your supporting information in this paper is over 100 pages long. Could you have taken some of that and published it as a separate paper? And I was a little irritated by this and under a lot of stress at the time. So I turned to him like, look, in my field, we can't publish the synthesis of our starting materials.
Yeah.
Which is true, right? You're just expected to be able to make it. All of that is incidental. It's like, here's just how I did it. But the real meat is at the forefront. Whereas, especially in a materials field, making your starting materials is still a big deal. And so they can publish a paper on that. Anyway, that conjugate addition went, and then we built a lot onto that and expanded it, not just into conjugate additions, but other substitution reactions. But that was the first hit. And again, it was inspired by this problem in total synthesis where nothing existing worked. And we had to take and modify something else to get it to work. And now we've come back and we found some solutions to the propargyl substitution problem, which are pretty interesting too. But in that particular synthetic problem, by the time we had worked out all this other chemistry, we'd actually figured out the problems with the original publication and did a biomimetic synthesis where we made it in 3 steps. And it was our first JAX paper, and, stood back and solved it a different way. And that's okay. We solved the problem.
That's really cool. I know you guys work. You guys do a lot of like method development, but I know you're also big in like enantioselective, like conjugate addition of those boronic acids. I guess do you guys still work in like kind of indole chemistry, right? Is there anything particular about the indole that kind of stuck out to you? Because like indoles are obviously a very common moiety, but they're not like the only very common moiety. So I was just kind of curious, like why the indole?
Indole is one of nature's most versatile building blocks. If you look at tryptophan, the amino acid, so it's readily available. We can't actually make tryptophan. It's one of those essential amino acids that we can't make ourselves. All of the aromatic amino acids we can't make. We have to get them from basically bacteria or fungi. And even, there may be some plants that can synthesize that, but we have to eat it to get tryptophan. But, in plants and fungus and marine organisms, all of these, that indole is super interesting as a building block because it has nucleophilic sites, it has that NH, it has an aromatic ring that's very electron rich. So there's a lot of facial stabilization, like N to pi and pi to pi interactions with the indoles. And then by substituting the indole, you can change the polarization of the electronics in that group a lot. And it's a lot of oxidation. If you look at serotonin, the neurotransmitter, that's just functionalized at the 5 position of the indole with the hydroxyl group. And now you have a hydrogen bonding group out there. And so around this ring, you can get the 7-hydroxyl, the 6. All of these have different biological functions because it puts the hydroxyl in a different place to interact with enzymes. It's also, especially as the amino acids, it's charged, so it's water soluble, but it's lipophilic enough with this big indole to pass through the blood-brain barrier and get into cells. So in terms of biological applications, it's just a hugely powerful element in plant chemistry and other chemistry. And so in secondary metabolites, that is things that organisms make that are not used to grow, but that are signaling molecules, maybe they're defensive molecules, antibiotics. The indole is very prevalent, so you get a lot of natural products that have it with very diverse and useful activity. And so that draws me a lot. And often the compounds are not huge or enormous, and so they're very approachable with clever methodology to make very rapidly. So that was true of the flinderols and borvarins. We're working on, I mentioned earlier, a motif that seems to be very privileged. And that is, if you imagine 3-carbon unit where you have hydroxyl, indole, that's an indole propylene glycol is what we're calling it. And that every one of the natural products that have been tested with that motif have shown some interesting biological activity, whether it affects Alzheimer's or acetylcholinesterase, whether it affects cancer metastasis, immune system regulation. It's like, there's convergent evolution there because these are made by different genuses of bacteria as well as fungus, and all of these things have developed this motif. That tells you something. If there's convergent evolution in different families, different kingdoms that are all converging toward this, so that's the attraction of the indole. Plus, like I said before, it challenges existing reactivity. 95% of the catalysts out there won't work if you have an indole in your molecule, so we have to develop new chemistry that does work.
Generally speaking, just for like some of the view, why can't a catalytic? Well, I guess if we can even make this more broad of a question too, is like, what is the problem with nitrogens and catalytic reactivity for like just for the general viewer? Like, why is that such a problem?
Well, the general viewer will have heard of acids, alkali base, free radicals. Most people are familiar with light, heat. And those are the 5 things that you use to make a reaction go. You need to put energy into the reaction to make a chemical bond form. Indoles will react readily with all 5 of those things. And that's good in a way. That's why they're so useful, but it's bad in getting controlled reactivity. Like if you want to build a bond that's not on the indole, what do you use that does not react with the indole? Because all of those things react. There's a lot of metal-based catalysts, even aluminum with Friedel-Crafts chemistry, palladium, gold, rhodium, iridium, all of these transition metals. Most of them are electrophilic. They're electron deficient enough, they'll react very quickly with the electron-rich indole. And you'll get indole palidation, a variety of other things. Any radicals readily add to heterocycles, in particular nitrogen heterocycles.
Yeah.
So all of these reaction intermediates are incompatible with the indole. So you have to go with catalytic reactivity that's very, very specific, very, very mild, and reacts in a very controlled manner. That's one of the reasons why we've turned to carbon-based catalysis and organocatalysts, because it does offer that mildness and that compatibility with them.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I know It's the nitrogen effect can add. I know you always say it, but I know you're not the first person to invent it. But it's like nitrogens add like what 5 years of like synthesis or something like that. How does the saying go? Where it's like,
yeah, I first heard it in grad school from Stoltz, who heard it from John Wood, who's, I'm sure it's been around. Is there every nitrogen in your natural product target adds a year onto your dissertation? So,
and
we
most of the
have
time
found
that
that
holds
not
true.
to be true. We use nitrogens all the time. It's just you need to match it with the appropriate chemistry.
Yeah, that's very fair. Some other things I actually wanted to pick your brain about is kind of like your teaching philosophy. So obviously, I took your course in organic reaction synthesis, and something you're very passionate about. But you're also a really good professor, at really teaching these concepts, very difficult concepts to students who generally have not seen like that much synthesis before. And so I kind of want to when you first started teaching the course to now, like how much has changed, whether it's the chemistry or your philosophy, and like also like just your kind of general teaching philosophy in general.
Sure. I'll talk about what's changed first, and that's some of the content in the class. Chemistry moves forward. And so I've added CH functionalization and CH oxidation. That was not in the course originally. I would like to add some more photo-initiated chemistry, whether that's photochemistry itself or photoredox chemistry. We do have handouts in that. So when I started, I had maybe 2 or 3 handouts, and now we have 14 or 15 on different subjects. Because part of my philosophy is I don't like the textbook companies. I don't like how they exploit students. I don't like also just how quickly things go out of date. So the handouts are a resource to give to students to make it so they don't have to buy all of these expensive textbooks. And here's the essential information that you need. My foundational teaching philosophy is to set high expectations on what a student needs, and then do everything I can to help get the students up to meet those expectations, and find out what works best for the student. And so the expectations for the class I teach are that you're going to know a lot of organic reactions, understand how they work and why they work. So that's mechanistic principles. Are they acid promoted, alkali promoted, etc.? And third, how do you use them to make things? Those are the 3 goals of the class. And that is a lot. I would say a good number of programs break that into 2 semesters to cover all of those goals effectively. But we have to get it all done in 1 semester. And it is an important class for all of the students who do organic chemistry. Even if you're doing applied chemistry with materials or polymers or anything else, you have to be able to go into the lab and run reactions and make things. All for experimental chemistry. And the theoretical groups need to understand the basics of reactivity to know if the transition states they're calculating and the pathways they're going through are reasonable, right? You have to have a basic understanding to know if what you're doing that's new is reasonable or not. So since you've been in the class, I've actually changed the format a little bit again. So your year, you had the flipped classroom, right?
Yes.
And so I recorded a video for every lecture. You would watch on your own and then come in and we would work problems together. That shows you how to use the reactions. The videos in the lecture are like, here's the stuff you have to memorize and just learn. Since then, I found that, in response to feedback from your class especially, that I need more interactive teaching. It's just too hard to really get all those concepts from just the video lecture. So I've gone back to having a separate problem session where we get together and work through things and learn how to use these. What are the pitfalls? What is the emerging complexity when you put different reactions together? So we practiced that. It was Saturday afternoon last year. I don't know if it still will be, but the performance went back up doing that and adding where now students will watch the video lectures, but then in the class, I will just interactively lecture on the most difficult concepts and the trickiest reaction mechanisms. Yeah. So that then there's an interactive, you can ask questions, get more insight. I can emphasize certain aspects of it. So the students still get all of the information, but then they get a double dose of the hard stuff. And then we go and we practice it. And that improved performance significantly. Not that you guys didn't do well. It's just I ran the experiment, and at least for this course, the flipped classroom on its own did not work. It worked great for the undergraduate class, but I'm always willing to look for things that work better. And I'm almost always asking students, hey, did this part help you? Did that part help you? And getting feedback. One thing I know for sure is that PowerPoint presentations don't help students very much. And that's been at every level I've had that feedback. So I do everything on the board myself, and even my lecture is drawing on a tablet while I'm talking about it so students can follow along anyway.
Yeah. I know students greatly appreciate it. I mean, your class was very difficult, but enjoyable. I think it's funny though, because when I came right out of undergrad, you really do think you know a lot, and then it's like, oh wow, you get a wake up call, like, oh, you don't even know anything yet. And so I laugh.
Here's 10 times what you had before.
Yeah. I still laugh about that now because I still think it's funny.
There really is. The first 3 or 4 weeks is kind of like a chemistry boot camp in grad school where we're reprogramming a lot of the ways you think about things.
Yeah. And, our group, we have problem sets. Like everyone loves doing total synthesis. And it's like, oh, well, you guys remember this one reaction? And so we remember those little moments from your class where it was just funny. And so, I always still appreciate organic synthesis. And still, I love reading. One, I like reading classic and total synthesis every once in a while. Like that book is really just like, even just like a chapter every once in a while, just to take a look about how they did it. Like, it's just super cool, I think. And the strategy of named reactions, I forget the exact title of that book, but that's a fun one to take a look at too. And that one's really good because it provides like mechanisms. So I'm going to give a shout out to that one. Shout out to that book.
And variations of it too.
Yeah. That one's extremely useful.
Yeah.
I guess, another question I had is, where the field, the general, this is actually a super general question. So I don't know, we'll see how this goes, but, the general field of like organic synthesis, where is it kind of going? Like, where is it heading towards?
I think increase in efficiency and practicality is a big one. You will still have the huge all-in efforts to make super complex molecules like the lateranes, the brevetoxin type structures. But really, you look at most of the modern publications in synthesis. For example, Maui crystal that I worked on in my postdoc. We were thinking, hey, we could cutting edge. We'd be able to make this in 25 reactions to 30 reactions, right? In Woodward's days, well, they couldn't even make it, but if they did, it would be more like 50 reactions, and it'd be horrible. But you look at Armin Zakarian's synthesis and Phil Barron's, they're around 14 or 15 reactions, better than I thought we could even do as a postdoc, and they're able to get 5% overall yield. So if you start with a kilogram, you're getting out 500 grams, and that's plenty to do biological studies, right? They're not starting with a kilogram, but so moving into that realm where we can make things well, we can make it increased speed and efficiency, and also make useful quantities. So there's a pharmaceutical company built around this. Kishi his company. It's ASI, where they will take natural products and find the minimal fragment that is needed to replicate the activity. And they're not afraid of super complex structures. And they will come up with syntheses that reduce, say, the 45-step published synthesis to like 10 to 15 steps of this fragment. And then they're doing clinical trials on these compounds. And it's been quite a successful strategy. I think we'll see more of that, at least in the next decade or so. You're going to see more integration of flow chemistry. Like once you establish a route to a key intermediate, then they'll establish a flow route to it to do the scale up and provide a large quantities of that. That's not going to solve all the problems, but it's going to be a tool. A lot of people are talking about AI figuring out syntheses. Right now, like to do anything more than simple coupling reactions, the AI can't handle it. There's just too much complexity. But for simple building blocks, I think that will become a useful tool where instead of looking something up in Reaxis or SciFinder, you'll go through an AI intermediate and they'll propose like a few different routes that are efficient to get to your key building blocks. And then you'll take those together and do the more innovative chemistry as you're going and figuring it out. There's just not enough information in the more complex environments to train an AI on it.
Yeah. It's almost like too nuanced too.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Well, and I don't know how well AI does with emerging complexity. Right? When it's when there's a linear complexity, like as the size increase, the complexity increase in a 1-to-1 ratio, that it can deal with. But in synthesis, as the size of the molecule increases or the amount of substitution, the complexity increases exponentially.
Yeah. And like 3D heteroatoms.
Yeah.
Like,
all the
stereochemistry
properties. Yeah. All of that, you add one more element and it doubles or triples the complexity for just one additional element. So that's, and the way synthesis really works is we don't design a synthesis and then go and do it. We come up with an idea that might work. We go and try it and it fails. But if you figure out why it fails, then you've learned something about the system and you can correct for it. And usually in a synthesis, you have to fail a half dozen times to learn enough about it to design something that does work. And I think that's underappreciated as a synthetic problem is we really don't know a lot about these systems. And I think we do ourselves a disservice by not publishing all the failed approaches along with the successful one, both to show the difficulty and to show just how much we do not know for this.
Yeah. I still wish there was like an archive of like failed reactions. Like there's got like, I don't know, just everyone just puts in all their failed experiments into this one archive, like, and that would be a lot of work. Don't get me wrong, but that would save a lot of chemists a lot of time. Because I'm sure, I don't even know how many groups keep trying the same reaction. It just doesn't work.
The main reason I don't like that is it can be limiting. Like if you look and say, oh, this is not going to work.
Fair enough.
Your permutation of it. Because there have been so many cases, for example, Tom Hoy's hexadehydrodiazolder reaction. That had been tried by Danishefsky at MIT. He tried to do that reaction, but his substrate was of the kind of three classes that they've defined. His substrate was of the one class that didn't work. The other two classes did. And if it had been published, this just doesn't work, maybe no one had tried that. Maybe Tom Hoy would stumble across it, right? So on the one hand, yes, it would be good to have that information. On the other hand, we certainly don't want to stifle innovation because once it becomes established that something doesn't work, people don't try it.
Yeah, that's true. I guess you have to be very nuanced about like the reaction conditions and the substrate you're using. Like that would have to be very specific. Yeah. And like if you did that, then
approach does not work in that.
Yeah, okay, yeah, Like, what were the exact reaction conditions? Not saying that this approach does not work, but like, here are the conditions we used. Here's the substrates we used. This did not work. What we're trying to target.
And that was my graduate work that was published 12 years later. So they published what did work, but then they published a full paper saying here are all the things we tried in the meantime and why they didn't work. And I think that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, that is. The last thing I actually wanted to ask you about here, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but is just some of your, not like your favorite forgotten reaction, but like maybe a couple reactions that chemists always forget about that are super useful. That like it'd be good to keep in your toolbox that people always forget about.
Well, I have to, because I've been talking about this so much, I'd have to say electrophilic deboronations.
Okay.
Most people know the Suzuki coupling, but what a lot of people don't know is that Akira Suzuki also found a metal-free addition. So he was the first one to do conjugate additions of boronic acids and boronate esters in a 2-electron fashion. He worked with H.C. Brown. But there's reactions like the alloboron doing an allylation of ketones and aldehydes. There's the potassium reaction. So the carbon-boron bond is very nucleophilic, especially if there's a pi bond there too. And you don't have to have transition metals. If you can just generate a cation, it will react with that. It's very easy and very simple. I have some favorite mechanisms. We were talking about this in group meeting a week and a half ago. The Bartoli-indole synthesis, which is a very specific application in indole synthesis. But it taught me a principle that I integrated in my class that I'd never seen before. And in that reaction, you have a nitroaromatic, and you treat it with a alkenyl Grignard, a vinyl Grignard.
Okay.
And the Grignard reduces the nitro group to a nitroso group.
Nitroso. Okay.
So
okay.
From NO2 to NO.
Yep. Okay.
And you take any student who's graduated with a bachelor's in chemistry and ask them, well, what do Grignards do? Oh, they're a nucleophile that adds to carbonyls, or they're a base, they'll deprotonate hydroxyls or amines. Very few people will tell you that it's a reducing agent.
Wait, and it stops the nitroso though? It just stops there?
No, it doesn't. It continues to react. So then it adds
okay.
the nitroso and reduces the nitroso. And then it does a 3,3 sigmatropic rearrangement to generate the carbon-carbon bond. But when I first learned about that reaction in graduate school, it really opened my mind that reagents don't know what they're supposed to do. Reagents just have, like a personality. There are multiple aspects to your personality. Introvert, extrovert, late night, early morning people, eloquent, funny, serious, intense. We have all of these different aspects of our personalities, and reagents are similar to that. And trying to profile a reagent that it does that one thing, it's kind of stereotyping for reagents, right?
Chemotyping.
And we're ignoring the other things that they can do. And so I've tried to bring that into my class, that every reagent has multiple aspects of the reactivity. Yeah. It could be an acid or a base, nucleophile, electrophile, oxidant or reductant. Neither be strong, can be weak. And then if you know basically whether they're more of a radical single electron mechanism preferred or dual electron, once you know those have kind of a complete profile of the reactivity, you can predict so much more about what a reagent is going to do and understand in your context. And that's what I've tried to bring into the class, and I never learned things that way. But it all came from that Bartoli-indole synthesis the first time I saw that, and seeing this mode of reactivity that I had not associated with that reagent before.
Yeah. And that's always a fun little game to play. I remember doing that. It's like acid base, oxidant reductant. And that's even in our group, when we're like thinking about when we do our very, very brief synthetic strategies or we're doing problem set, like we still think about those. So it's really fun. But Professor May, I would like to thank you for your time, for coming onto the podcast today.
Sure.
I really enjoyed your time here.
Good to talk to you again. Yeah. Always good to have your conversation.
And for the listeners, thank you again for another episode, and I guess we'll see you on the next one.